So my journey begins, I was born and raised in a Christian home, and like many people, we went to church on Sunday mornings, and that's what we did. Wasn't always a fan because I'd end up missing Disney on Sunday evenings. At a young age, I'd say at the age of 7, I gave my life to Jesus, more or less because I was scared of the repercussions of not doing it. We had a guy named Magic Wally come up, and he was a magician, a ventriloquist, and he basically scared Jesus into my life.
Well, I grew up in a great home. I had 2 fantastic parents, both believed in Jesus Christ, and I gave my heart to God at the age of 3. Grew up in a very happy home, just me and my sister, and we moved quite a bit. And so when I was about 13 years old, my dad got a job 5 hours from where we lived. And so we would take turns on the weekend driving back and forth, a 10-hour round trip, and just to finish off the school year, because my mom was a teacher. And that's the year that God really became my own personal relationship, because my earthly father was somewhat removed, and I really turned to my Heavenly Father at that point, and my relationship became much deeper.
I'd say a big part of where my journey began was to backtrack a few years, and when I was at the age of 4, I met a very close friend who I ended up going through school, junior high school with. He was my best friend, Ian. When we hit high school, I'd say my walk with Christ was, past lukewarm. I went to church not because I wanted to, just because we had to. Always almost prayed Sunday mornings that my parents would sleep in, and they'd sleep through their alarm so we wouldn't have to go. I was at a friend's house, and my parents showed up on a Sunday morning, and kind of shocked. And they're standing there, and I look up and I see my mom. She's got tears coming down her eyes, and I'm like, what's wrong? She looks at me and says, Ian had been in a car accident the night before, and they're not sure if he's gonna make it. I walk into the ICU, and I'm walking down this hallway and walking past these hospital beds, and then I feel a tug on my shirt, and my parents call me back, and they're like, this is him right here. And just the extent of his injuries, I didn't even recognize him. He was in the ICU for 3 days, and then that was it. He didn't make it, and that's when kind of the anger really started.
When I was 18, I went to Brazil for 9 weeks. Actually, went to the jungle and traveled through to different villages doing clowning. And while I was gone, my family moved. So I had left a small town, and I came home, and they were living in Ancaster. Came into a bedroom full of boxes they had packed up for me. And at 18, that was really hard. So I had 2 courses left in my OAC year, and back when they had OACs, and I didn't want to go to a new big high school for 2 credits, so I had quite the summer with God in Brazil, and just thought, I think I'm gonna go to Bible college and do my prerequisites there just for the year, and had a great year, a lot of growing, and at the end of that year I got a little sidetracked in my life plan, and I decided I'd switch into a program and stay a bit longer. After a couple years struggling at Bible college, I actually switched into a 2-year Bible and left. All my friends were getting married. I had been a bridesmaid a million times. And I met someone who actually I had known from my childhood. We became engaged and got married, and very quickly during our engagement, things became stressful. That year, he became very abusive. Emotionally, I think, is the worst part of abuse. It sticks with you. And physically, and he was also unfaithful to our marriage. So as a young newlywed, that was really a lot to process. And as someone who had grown up in a somewhat stable home, just the normal ups and downs of teenagehood, it just really rocked me. Had not experienced anything like this before. I remember hiding in the corner of a basement just for safety, and just being harmed in ways that I wouldn't dream on anyone. My mom called on my 25th birthday. I remember sitting on the couch and she called and she's singing happy birthday to me over the phone, and she finished and I just burst into tears. They did not know at this point what had been going on. Eventually I did end up having to get out of the home, and I grabbed my cat and a small bag, and back then we didn't have cell phones, so my cordless phone, and I'm out on the front lawn where neighbors can see me, so I knew I was safe, and called a taxi, and they drove me to my parents' place. And just God's hand, even in those horrible situations, was so evident. My parents at our birthday dinner had kind of discreetly snuck me some cash and were like, just hide it in case you ever need to get out, because it was new territory for them too, to know how to support me through this. I wasn't a child, but they were certainly concerned, and so I'd stashed this money away. And when I arrived at my destination in that taxi, it was the exact amount of money that they had given me for in my wallet. So just little things like that along the way. It sounds silly, but they were real reminders to me that God just had his hand on me in a horrible situation. He was still right there with me.
And then I did find an outlet that kind of helped me deal with the pain that I was feeling. I started self-harming myself. Because at that moment, when I was cutting myself, that physical pain actually would block out the emotional pain that I was feeling, and it felt good. It kind of gave me a little bit of a rush. And then soon after that, it was getting to the point where that wasn't enough, and I started to experiment with drugs. And football had been a big part of my life as well growing up. I was good too. I had a few offers from some colleges and some universities that wanted me to come check it out, but that was short-lived as well, because winter training camp one year I ended up blowing out my knee. So at this point, God was non-existent. He was, I would say, an enemy.
There was some time, and then the church that we were attending, an amazing church, offered me the position as their children's ministry director, which was a dream job. I mean, I had like 200 to 300 kids that I could just pour love on, and that really filled a void in my life for a while.
A friend of mine that I grew up with at NBC as well came up to me. He's like, hey man, like, I know you're struggling, why don't you just come to church? I went there, and there was a couple guys, and they were doing a baptismal service that Sunday, and these guys were sharing their stories, and their stories were so similar to mine. This is the first time I had prayed in like probably since Ian died. And I'm like, God, I want this pain gone. I want something to happen, because I can't do this anymore on my own. And then they ended the service by singing Refiner's Fire, and that song just took me down. Started bawling my eyes out, and walking to the front of the church, there had been a gentleman standing there, and he had been bugging me for a while to kind of come out and check out this Bible site I wanted nothing to do with. But yeah, I went up, and he was standing there with open arms, and just broke down and rededicated my life. And that was a massive turning point for me. So the end of the year, my Bible study leader, this guy, I guess I would consider him a mentor, challenged me. He's like, well, have you thought about Bible college? So in September 2001, I started my journey to be a youth pastor at Haydens Bible College.
Meanwhile, I had some friends who were mutual friends of Mike's, and we had been, during these years of dating other people and me going through this horrible marriage, I had met Mike several times.
And in my last year of Bible college, I had been dating a girl.
These mutual friends that we had said to him, if you can be single by this date, we're gonna bring you to Jill's cottage.
I was like, all right. So I got on the phone, broke up with my girlfriend, and 2 weeks later, went up to the cottage to meet Jill, and that was kind of history.
8 weeks later, we were confidently engaged, knowing that God had brought our two journeys together. So we had a hot summer wedding.
It was hot.
So hot.
It was like plus 35 or something like that.
Just a small wedding in the park. It just felt very real to me. It was real life, really the way it should be. So we were excited. I was still working at the church. We had amazing friends there, and the first couple of years of our marriage were just amazing. I had shared that it had always been a dream of mine to have kids, and so we very early on were like, let's have a baby, and that was our first trial. It did not come easily for us, and so once again I felt like I had to come before God and be like, okay, maybe I don't get to be a mom. Thankfully, I did become pregnant with our first baby girl, and then you had an opportunity as you finished Bible college.
I guess just a little bit after graduation, we were presented with an opportunity to go to this church, and we knew some of the people at the church, and it seemed like a great opportunity. Up until my first day, I'm walking in to the church with my box of books, all gung-ho to start, this new venture of life, this ministry that I felt called to. And as I'm walking in, I'm seeing the senior pastor of this church pack up his stuff in the same style of boxes and carry them out to his car. This church had just previously gone through a church split that we were a little unaware about. During the interview process with the elders and deacons, they presented this church as this amazing place that had all these great ministries and opportunities. We started to realize that these ministries did happen. They just happened years ago and were not actually taking place. And it just seemed to almost kind of get worse and worse. So they brought in an interim pastor, an amazing man of God that had been known to go into struggling churches and kind of revamp them and get them going. And he looked at us, he's like, Mike, Joe, you guys need to leave this church. This is not a healthy church. I have been in some other churches that have been able to reconcile their differences and stuff like that. He's like, I don't see this happening for a very, very long time. I felt like an absolute failure because I was all gung-ho, feeling like, that I, even like with God's help, could bring some change into this church and bring it to this new standard, or even just a vibrant place of worship. And it didn't happen. It just seemed like each month I was just getting knocked down peg by peg by peg, to the point where at the end of it I just again was feeling this almost worthless self-worth attitude about myself because I had nothing.
So we moved in with my parents it was supposed to be for
6 weeks.
6 weeks, and we ended up there for 2 years.
So we had been candidating at different churches, talking to different pastors. So we had 6 churches on the go. One by one, they came back and said, you know what, because of Jill's past, we cannot bring you on staff. You want to talk about like disappointment? That was a big hit for us, and that kind of got me right back to the whole being angry at God. That's when the painkillers that I was taking from my knee surgeries, when I blew that out, kind of came into play. I started to realize that being able to self-medicate with this stuff was actually helping me feel better about myself, even though I knew it was not good. Soon and very quickly, it got to the point where just, those couple pills a day was not enough.
And I didn't know at this point that there was consumption of pills happening. He kept it pretty hidden as it grew, but I did see changes in him. I thought, of course he's down or depressed because of what we were going through. But it became harder for him to get up in the morning. He was sleeping a lot more. It became difficult for him to hold a job.
My pill consumption and even, I guess, hidden substance abuse was just getting worse and worse. So we ended up moving to our home, a fixer-upper. But during that time, I would say those are probably the darkest points in our marriage that we've ever faced.
I didn't feel like I knew who he was anymore. I was starting to forget who he was when I married him because it was so gradual, the change. And eventually started to figure out what was going on. At this point, we had a toddler and a newborn, and my newborn was not sleeping. So I was exhausted, and I felt very much out of my element. I mean, I had grown up in a solid home, had never been exposed to anything like this. We did finally communicate about the pills and tried to seek some help. I thought that we were cutting back, but the lies were still happening, and there was still a lot of deception and hidden. He was pretending that it was working. His skin was changing color, he was gray, he was gaining weight, his skin was off, like your whole diet was off. And I was seeing this man that I love and admire fall apart right before my eyes.
I remember countless days, like, the thoughts of suicide were regular on a daily basis, but never could bring myself to do it, knowing that I would be leaving Jill and the kids all by themselves, but also fighting in my mind, well, they're probably better off without me.
After some time, realized that this weaning process was not happening, and he got himself into some trouble, which resulted in him having to come and confess and share where he was at. And that was a turning point for us. My first reaction was anger. We had been going through this for several years now, 2 or 3 years, and the heat of it. And I was tired. I thought we had tried so many options, and it had taken so much energy on a lot of people's part. And here we are again, finding out that all of it meant nothing. And I felt like a fool. I, probably not very nicely, said I need some time.
And that's when Teen Challenge was presented to me.
Here I am calling him saying, you need to go to Teen Challenge and you need to complete the entire year to be able to come home.
So hearing those words from someone you love and someone that you know you've hurt makes things very real as to, this could be the end of my marriage. And then thinking about what Jill has gone through in the past already, I'm like, I'm just taking her for round 2. My brother and sister, they came pick me up at my parents' place and drove me to TC. And again, you think you hit rock bottom before, and then you walk into a rehab center for drug addiction as an ex-pastor. There's no words to explain that.
I remember walking in the grocery store with my kids, this might have been before you left, with $36 cash in my hand and a calculator and a piece of paper, trying to figure out how am I gonna feed my family for a week on $36. That was the day-to-day stress I had been dealing with. God provided for us. I remember stopping at the mailbox one day and opening an envelope. There was no return address, no name, and there was a gift card for the grocery store in there. And of course I burst into tears because it was sent by God through I don't know who, but I needed that week. I came to the conclusion that forgiveness is a choice, not necessarily a feeling. And there's lots of feelings going around, but I wanted our marriage to succeed, and I wanted to get back what I believed God had given us from the beginning of our relationship. He's saying to me, like, are you going to get to the place where you can forgive me? And so then, of course, I'm crying and he's crying, and I realized I had never told him that I had reached that point of forgiveness, and how desperately as a man he needed to hear that. And so that was a breaking moment in our relationship to start the healing process for me to be able to actually say the words to him, Mike, I forgive you. In fact, I think my words were, I already forgave you and I forgot to tell you, but I forgave you a while ago and I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. And I feel like that's really when we were able to turn a corner and start to build our relationship again. I was very clear in our conversation. It was very real. I forgive you. The past is the past. We're going to move forward. However, trust and forgiveness are separate. And we had to work through that. We had to realize, okay, forgiveness is the first step, but trust is the hard one. And trust takes time. Forgiveness is a choice. Trust takes a lot of time. And it took us several years, I think, to really build to the point where we can say we absolutely trust each other again. I trust Mike completely, and he has worked very hard to get to that point.
We are definitely stronger than we have ever been.
Mike is my favorite person, for sure.
She's okay.
I think that's probably why we wanted to share our stories, to be a little more transparent with people, because people don't feel that they can share what's going on in their life when it's not peachy. Everyone has trials.
I have now been home for 5 years.
More than 5 years.
Clean and sober for 6 years, which
is pretty awesome. Yeah.
My advice would be for anyone struggling with anything, whether it's addiction, issues with work, friends, anything like that, is be honest. Reach out, talk to somebody. You can go 1 day sober.
Get people in your life who will help you with that. And have hope.
Yeah. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jill.
And that's our story.